All right, so in the video that follows this one, we're going to look at how the allegory of the cave can be read as an illustration of Plato's metaphysics. And what I mean by that is Plato's understanding of the nature of reality and what exists and how things exist. But in this video, I want to explore some other interpretations of the allegory. If you were assigned to read this in high school, or maybe even in a college class other than this one, I'm going to bet you were encouraged to interpret this as an allegory of the process of enlightenment, an allegory of the process of becoming an educated person. And certainly if we dig just one layer down beneath our literal interpretation of the events of the story, we can see how this is absolutely illustrating this. Because, we have our hero here at the bottom of the cave, and he knows a very, very, very scanty little sliver of the world, this wall of shadows that's in front of him. And he goes on this journey where he learns things and learns more about what the world is really like, and comes to see things differently, and then wants to share that new information with his friends at the bottom of the cave. We should take note of a couple of things that are important on this journey toward becoming educated or enlightened. One is that the first step is that he is unchained and has a change of perspective. So he's unchained and it's uncomfortable. He tries to stand, but this is kind of creepy and scary. I've never done this before. And whoa, the moment I changed my perspective physically, I'm seeing things that I've never seen before. And this causes me to see the things that I saw before differently. So before I thought those shadows on the wall were all that there was. And now I can see that it's actually these puppets that are creating those shadows. And I never knew that before. So I had to, by changing my perspective, I was able to see things that I hadn't seen before. I was able to see different things. But now that I've seen those different things, it causes me to see those shadows a little bit differently. So this change in perspective is both kind of psychological and also physical. I see different things and I see things differently. Okay, so that's one thing we'd want to take note of in this journey towards education. And of course, you can see this perspective broadening as this person goes out of the cave. One of the things that would have happened to him immediately is that he would have realized that as a chained up person, he was in the worst state one could possibly be in, which is total ignorance, right? And what I mean by that is there's times when I don't know things, of course. But if I know that I don't know them, I can just Google them, or I can go ask somebody for information. Knowing that you don't know something is a pretty good position to be in, because then you can go do the steps to know. But when you don't know that you don't know, that's a bad spot, because you don't even know that there's questions you should be asking. And so therefore you don't know what questions to ask. And so the moment this person stands up, sees those puppets, sees that fire, he's going to realize like, oh wow, when I was chained up, it didn't even occur to me to think that there was anything back here. I would have never asked what's behind me when I was chained up, because I had never experienced this space behind me. I didn't even know it existed, let alone that there were people carrying puppets in a fire behind me, right? So it's this realization that happens when you're becoming an educated person, that you're starting to realize that you didn't know things, and you didn't know that you didn't know them. But now that you know more things, you can continue to build on that, right? And that's what we see our friend doing here, is he embarks on the journey, right? That this education is a journey, but it's not like river rafting, right? This is an allegory of the cave. This is, in order to come out of the darkness and into the light, it's a tough journey, right? For him, it's about his muscles and being scraped on the ground and having to climb up this hill. But certainly we can see the metaphorical value in that, right? That education it's tough. It involves a lot of hard work, and a lot of the hard work is not just, oh, I've got to stick with my studies and I've got to stay focused and disciplined. Part of what makes it tough is you're going to get out of your comfort zone. It's described in the story as experiencing a certain amount of distress, and that can happen with education. You come into education having lived 20, 30, 40, 50 years, thinking about the world in a particular way, and now all of a sudden that's challenged, that can be really, really, really scary. It will oftentimes cause people to retreat, go back into that cave and say, I'm more comfortable with the chains. The world's just too scary for me. I'd rather go back into ignorance and not know this stuff, right? So education is about taking risks, and it's about being willing to realize that what you thought was true is not true, and that can make you uncomfortable. When you get out into the world and you feel like you are finally seeing things for what they really are, and you realize that the way that you were previously thinking about the world was really a very shallow way of thinking about the world, and you now have this much deeper, much more complex, much more exciting way of seeing the world, you have a certain responsibility then to spread that word back to those who still remain ignorant. So you see our friend, he decides, I got to get back down there in the cave. I've got to share this knowledge that I have. But of course, when he goes down to the bottom of the cave and tries to explain to his friends what he's learned, they don't understand him. They think he's speaking in gibberish, and they think he's gone a little nuts. And what this is sort of telling us is that education can't be given. It has to be undertaken. And there's a line in the allegory where they say something, Socrates says something like, could you put sight into an eyeball? And it's like, well, no. And Socrates then says, well, of course you can't put knowledge in a person. They're not like a sponge. They have to take this journey both within and also without. And they have to learn this firsthand. You can't just put knowledge in a person, like water into a sponge. And they're not gonna. They're gonna have to undertake this journey on their own. And no matter how much you talk to them, they're not gonna understand what you're telling them about this glorious world outside of the cave, because they don't even have the reference to understand what he's even talking about. So in order for them to become enlightened, and in order for us to become enlightened, we can't rely on others to give us that knowledge and wisdom. We've got to take this on our own. Now, you might think about some other ways to interpret this story. This is The Matrix, right? This is Truman Show. This is about people realizing my understanding of the world was not exactly accurate. My understanding of the world was how it appeared to me to be. And I learned that that's not actually how the world is. So I've kind of woken up from this. Another common interpretation of this is, well, this is really about you and I and our understanding of the world and what's happening in it and the media, right? So the interpretation goes something like, when you're down here in this cave and you're watching these shadows on the wall, that's sort of the equivalent of watching things on YouTube or watching the news. And somebody somewhere is deciding how to represent the events of the world to you. And you feel like you're seeing the world as it actually is. It's like, I saw it with my own eyes. And folks would say, well, no, just like those people sitting at the bottom of the cave saw the shadows with their own eyes, that doesn't mean they actually saw the puppets. The shadows are just representations of the puppets. So they just saw what the people carrying the puppets chose to show them. But that's not necessarily the whole world. That's a constructed vision of the world, and it's constructed by these unseen people behind the wall carrying those puppets. And so you can certainly kind of walk down this road and think like, oh my gosh, yes, this is, if I get out of my media bubble, then I start to see that things are much different. Or I talk to people that I wouldn't ordinarily talk to because they don't share my religious or my political perspective. And in talking to these people, I realize they're so different from how they're portrayed to me on media. If I only watch like Fox News, I'm going to have an understanding of people who are to the left politically that's crafted for a particular purpose, right? And I'm going to go out in the world and think that, everybody's a lefty communist who wants to burn a flag and rip down the country. But on the other hand, if I watch just like MSNBC or CNN, I'm going to have a really crafted understanding of people who are on the political right. I'm going to think they're all QAnon, who want to insert some sort of fascist authoritarian dictator on us. And then when I go out in the real world and I actually start meeting people who are on the political left or the political right and having conversations with them, I start to realize, wow, that's not the image of the person that I was being given by my news media bubble. And of course, you could extend this to social media. Oh my gosh. Think about the allegory of the cave and how you might interpret this as a representation of the world, the difference between this artificial, constructed, synthetic world that we create in social media versus the world out there, right? Like I hear people all the time say, like, Twitter's not the real world. Facebook's not the real world. This is why Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse is so terrifying. Guess we'll be living in that. Anyway, okay, that would be a great way to interpret Allegory of the Cave, actually, the metaverse. All right, so these are some really common kinds of interpretations of the Allegory of the Cave. And in the next video, we'll start digging into sort of the philosophic interpretations of the allegory.